Hi there, my name's Sean Devine. Recently, I presented a video that showed that the activist narrative on global warming, where the lack of apparent action is blamed on governments and business, is dangerously wrong. The link to this video is given below. These blame activists, as I call them, just have no idea of what needs to be done, because they see no need to engage with the coalface of the economy, those who are going to make the difference. In this video, I outline the problems that actually need to be faced. I show that what is needed is right action, and no amount of righteous activism will get us anywhere. Let's get into it. The global warming narrative must shift from blame to action. The common blame narrative of many activists sees global warming as simply a management problem. If only people like us were running the show, they would say, we could solve the problem. This is completely wrong. That is why the nations at the Glasgow conference at the end of last year, COP26, did not make outrageous or even courageous pledges. Because honest economies know the capability to reach net zero by 2050 does not yet exist. See, for example, Mark Carney in his Reith lectures. To make progress, we must nurture an informed society that works together to face the future with realism and commitment. We need a narrative based on values, as Carney argues, where businesses can generate profit within a coherent value system, where governments reject power values in favor of commitment, and where activists recognize it's not about blame, but enabling the productive sector, those who are going to make the difference, to rise to the challenge. We now face a likely recession because of COVID and the Ukrainian war, and this restricts options. Declining economies cannot address global warming without impacting on the poorest. Either many will suffer or nothing much will happen, and the second is the most likely. The reality is that today's energy systems cannot meet the challenge of an extra 2 billion people by 2050 unless poverty becomes the norm. So this talk focuses on the path ahead to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. First, of course, we need massive tree planting programs enhanced by robotic planting systems, and coupled with a focus on recycling. And we also must capture and store carbon dioxide in the meantime, as, for example, Climeworks is doing. And we need to remove carbon dioxide from the ocean using renewable energy, but mimicking the formation of shells. We must develop far more effective energy storage capability to cope with the intermittent nature of renewables. In parallel with this, we need innovative forms of energy production to replace fossil fuels. But a critical point is that an economy is not a true equilibrium system. I show that the more developed an economy, the further it is from thermodynamic equilibrium, and see the reference. A developed economy like the United States is sustained by massive amounts of energy compared to third world economies. Developed societies will collapse without energy and will ultimately collapse too if they fail to address carbon dioxide emissions. The first step is to find a way of determining the greenhouse gas damage of different forms of human activity. We call this the carbon footprint, the actual carbon dioxide cost of a particular activity. Now let's move on to scoping the issues that we face. But there are issues with renewables. Fossil fuels are energy intensive and simpler to transport. That's why they're so useful. But conventional renewables tend to be intermittent, generating on average less than a quarter of the peak, which is a kilowatt per square meter of collection area. The sun turns off at night, and for much of the time, the wind may not be blowing. Off-peak storage systems are as yet unable to realize the full potential of renewables, and this must be solved. Solar collectors and wind generators at the local level must either store the surplus energy for the downtimes or feed the energy back into the national grid, keeping resources for later use. In the case of hydroelectricity, surpluses can be used to pump water back into the storage lakes. But nevertheless, for many systems, fossil or a nuclear background is still currently needed. There are other issues with renewables that need to be considered. Silicon solar collectors, as I've mentioned, have a 3-year payback time, which limits their effectiveness. Alternative perovskite thin film structures are cheaper, have shorter payback times, and are more efficient, but the problem is they deteriorate faster. So more R&D is required to ensure that they last, effectively reducing the carbon footprint. Tandem silicon and perovskite structures capture different regions of the spectrum and have nearly 30% efficiency, and you can see the reference there. But as yet, the system is not commercialized. Biofuels can be made from waste, but they often compete with land required for food, and this is problematic. Biofuels from algae, perhaps grown on lakes or on the sea, may be better. Geothermal. Over 80 countries have developed methods of accessing geothermal energy systems. They be used both to generate energy or just as a simple heat source. The US currently produces 3.7 gigawatts, and geothermal could meet 10% of the US electricity demand. Geothermal heat pumps can be used more widely, and you can tap into depths of 3 to 90 meters to do this. These can be designed to be reversible, some are, but geothermal needs significant investment to be properly utilized. Nuclear power is going to be essential. Despite the optimist, it seems unlikely that greenhouse gas targets can be reached without a significant expansion of nuclear power. We must feed and sustain an extra 2 billion people by 2050. This would require 40,000 square kilometers of extra solar renewables over and above that needed to replace current fossil fuels. And the area is even greater if we're to use wind or wave power. Here are some of the nuclear options. Conventional uranium or plutonium-based fission involves a chain reaction releasing massive amounts of energy, but there are problems with radioactive waste, with safety, as seen in Chernobyl and Fukushima, and fission material can be used for weapons. Nevertheless, France, the UK, and Poland plan to increase nuclear power plants. France already generates 76% of its electricity by nuclear. Germany is considering delaying its phase out of nuclear power. Now, new designs are safer, while waste or misuse can be better managed. There are new developments with conventional nuclear power. Small modular nuclear reactors are now an option. The cost of these is about 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Solar is cheaper, but if you add the batteries in, it's about the same. Currently, in December 2021, a 200 megawatt plant was installed in China. Rolls-Royce and NuScale are close to operation of these small reactors. Another option is the thorium molten salt reactor. Far less waste problems, safer, and extremely difficult to use the thorium products for weapons. It's not yet commercial, but it could be the game changer. China expects a commercial version by 2030. Indonesia is planning one earlier by 2025. Interestingly, the cost is about 5.4 cents a kilowatt hour for a 30-year lifetime. Nuclear fusion options. Nuclear fusion mimicking the sun requires two light atoms, deuterium and tritium, to fuse together, releasing massive amounts of energy. But a massive force is required to compress the constituents, perhaps using a magnetic field by a laser implosion or by hitting two atoms together as a projectile. Currently, fusion is not commercial, as the technology to compress the atoms to fuse is purely experimental. Controlled fusion at the moment only lasts for seconds or fractions of seconds. There is nowhere near enough energy to cover the energy cost of running the magnets, etc. But currently, MIT is using high-temperature superconductors, and it hopes to demonstrate a viable system in the next couple of years. Whatever the system used, a critical problem to be solved is energy storage, and I want to discuss that next. Storing technologies at the current time are far from adequate. Energy from non-fossil fuel sources can be stored as electricity in battery systems, as green hydrogen, that's hydrogen that's come from renewable sources, or as biofuels produced from plant material and waste, or as gravity systems when water is pumped up or pumped to store in lakes or oceans. The take-home message, though, is that without society committing to massive investment in technology and innovation and storage, little progress will be made. And here's an example of the storage systems which I'll discuss in more detail later: hydrogen, batteries, thermal. I should just mention this, although I won't discuss it later. It's not a game changer, but you can store energy as heat in concrete or stone. And then we look at hydro and sea storage batteries. First of all, green hydrogen. Hydrogen produced from water using green electricity is highly efficient, storing 41.7 megajoules per kilogram. Again, hydrogen can be used to synthesize other fuels to replace fossil fuels. And hydrogen from electrolysis water is currently inefficient, but alternative commercial processes are on the horizon to increase the efficiency. For example, managing the emission of bubbles in the electrolysis process to get 95% conversion efficiency. But the difficulty is raw hydrogen needs to be stored itself under high pressure, and there's the risk of explosion. So we need to talk about hydrogen storage. Hydrogen can be stored as a metal hydride system. One example is plasma kinetics, which stores hydrogen in nanostructured thin films that act as a sponge, and the hydrogen can be released by using a laser in a structure rather like a compact disc. Hydrogen can also be stored using clathrates. These are porous compounds with a high surface area, and you can see the reference there. California, for example, has invested $242 million to support the hydrogen economy. But unfortunately, some of this hydrogen comes from fossil fuel. Battery systems need significant innovation for commercialization. The energy density, the storage capacity, and the charging rates are still not adequate. The best is the lithium-ion or similar standard battery, and Tesla's gone a long way with that. But there's low storage, the heavy, high cost. 40% of the weight of an electric vehicle is its battery. Places like Tesla have sophisticated manufacturing to reduce costs. There's another possibility, which is graphene supercapacitors. These are fast charging, but charge is stored directly, which is different from a battery itself. But then you can have hybrids of a graphene supercapacitor and a lithium-ion battery. Very promising. The charge is also stored in chemical form in this case. Then we have a lithium-ion and a silicon-based anode. The energy densities are up, lower cost per kilowatt hour. Tesla, for example, has brought out one of these, Sil-Lion Incorporated, and Amperius Tech uses nanowire. Then we have the solid-state battery. over 2 times faster charging than the lithium ion, but the costs are high and the internal stresses are limited. Investment is needed to commercialize this possibility. Toyota will initially use these batteries in their hybrids. Then we have the concrete battery as part of structures. The prototype stage only is mortar as the electrolyte. Battery prices are falling and charging rates are improving. Battery pack prices falling below $132 per kilowatt hour are approaching the fossil fuel equivalent of $100 a kilowatt hour. Battery energy densities have tripled in the last 10 years, and in the US, the medium range for electric vehicles is 250 miles. Charging rate and charging infrastructure is critical. At the current time, you have to drink a lot of coffee while waiting in the queue to get a turn on the car charger. But there are now fast charging systems relying on 400 to 900 volts direct current charging. The cost of these chargers is about $150,000 per charging unit, but the question is who's going to pay to ensure we have an adequate supply? There are many battery innovations taking place. Charging rates are dropping through managing heating or by re-engineering the batteries, and you can see the link there. It is unclear which battery system will ultimately prove most effective. Investment needs to cover all serious possibilities at the moment. But a point to note is that the Chinese are making serious advances in electric vehicles and their batteries. And it could well be that at 5 or 6 years' time, Chinese electric vehicles will be the major source in the world. But it's unrealistic to expect the current role of improvement to continue. It just may not. The critical thing is how does all this fit together? An organization called Rethink X provides a plan for the future. It's a bit optimistic because it assumes everyone is going to be singing from the same song sheet, but nevertheless, it makes some very important points. This report outlines the key factors that need to be addressed, and the link is there. The report argues that markets can and must play the dominant role in reducing emissions. Significant technologies are already available or can be deployed, provided the right societal choices are made. Rethink X argues that decarbonizing the global economy could save trillions of dollars. Perhaps, provided we have enough economic surpluses for investment, but if there is economic decline, the cost could be prohibitive. We need to integrate the incremental changes into a holistic or systems approach, so Rethink X claims. Traditional energy, transport and food systems are now being disrupted by solar, wind and batteries. That's true, but we're not moving anywhere near as fast as we need to. But they argue the clean disruption of energy, transport and food will narrow rather than widen the gap between rich and poor. I'm not so sure unless the technologies become widely available to the poor, but an interesting point. They argue that fermentation and cellular agriculture will replace traditional food sources. Perhaps again, but agriculture relies mainly on solar energy, whereas cultured food more likely requires renewable energy, which currently is in short supply. Societal choices matter, as they argue. So Rethink X provides a path forward, but it's optimistic about the behavior of business and politicians. The approach of Mark Carney, the UK advisor to the COP26 conference, provides a more realistic framework that will allow all to sing from the same song sheet. Carney notes that we must manage our economic system through a values approach. And if you have a values approach to constrain the market, the private sector will play a key role in innovation. The catch-22 is that the private sector needs surplus to invest, and unless the political establishment also abides by the same values, the private sector will be unable to carry a cautionary tale is that of Elon Musk of Tesla, and he's leading the way in electric vehicle manufacture in the US. The US political system actually opposes Tesla. In August of 2021, President Biden met with some electric vehicle manufacturers, promising subsidies and claiming that General Motors was leading the world in electric vehicles. Elon Musk of Tesla was not invited. Tesla was not given subsidies, yet in the last quarter of 2021, General Motors made 26 electric vehicles and Tesla made 303,000. And here we see that power seekers have no moral authority over profit seekers. They're as bad as each other. In May of 2022, Tesla was ejected from the Standard & Poor's 500 ESG index. That's an index of the environmental, social, and governance responsibility. Yet ExxonMobil, which is mired in controversy over claims of climate denialism, is in the top 10. The ESG is not an outcome-oriented system, but is shaped by political and bureaucratic forces. It's like penalizing your top goal kicker while because he or she has dirt on their shorts. Governments in seeking power are our greatest danger. The Netherlands, Austria, Germany, and Greece are at this very moment reverting to coal-generated electricity to replace Russian natural gas. Natural gas emits half the carbon dioxide as does coal for the same energy. Why? Because these nations are fighting an economic war to weaken Russia. 20% of the extra greenhouse gas emissions because of the coal will be with us in 1,000 years' time, continuing to warm the globe over that period. Our behavior must change. No longer is waving placards going to make any difference. It is as effective as doing a rain dance. True, the rains will ultimately come, but the dance has no effect on the outcome. So we need some cultural and behavioral changes. The pandemic has shown us that technologies like Zoom avoided the need for travel and face-to-face contact. Buildings can be designed to reflect more sunlight through coatings on glass and paint, and certain minerals reflect the light back in the direction the light came. We could have heated clothes and run our dwellings at lower temperature. But in the end, it's about societal values. But we are running out of time. Disinformation, blame, and lack of honesty are undermining our social cohesion, leaving society unprepared for the economic choices we must make. The dominant narrative now must move from one of power to one of societal engagement and encouraging societal buy-in. Understanding the science or the environmental impact of climate change is now largely irrelevant. The game must now be played on the economic field and how we are to bring about change.